Michael Jordan runs into a former PE teacher now using a walker. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Michael Jordan's story begins on a basketball court in Wilmington, North Carolina, far from the spotlight, in a world where dreams were still untold. He was just another kid trying to make a name for himself, but even at a young age, there was something about Michael that set him apart. He wasn't the tallest, nor the fastest, but his drive to win was unmatched. And that drive was shaped early on by moments that would test his resolve in ways most kids couldn't imagine. Jordan's earliest memories of basketball weren't of dunking over defenders or making game-winning shots. They were of rejection. When he was a sophomore at Laney High School, he tried out for the varsity team and failed to make the cut. His friends, who were also cut from the team, had their own versions of disappointment, but for Michael, this moment was a catalyst. He didn't sulk. He didn't quit. Instead, it sparked a fire inside him. The coach, who had cut him, would become one of the people he'd come to prove wrong. His mother, Dolores Jordan, would tell him over and over that he was capable of greatness. "You're gonna make it," she would say. Yet, there was no magic formula. Michael was simply going to have to outwork everyone around him. And that's exactly what he did. He poured hours of practice into his game, even as other kids were out playing games with friends or relaxing. But Michael wasn't like most kids. He had something else burning inside him, an obsession with greatness. The people around him noticed. His high school coach, Clifton Herring, recognized Michael's potential. Even though he was young and had a lot to learn, it didn't take long for him to realize that Michael had something special. He encouraged him to keep pushing, even when things seemed impossible. By his junior year, Michael had transformed from the kid who couldn't make varsity into one of the most dominant players in the state. The growth wasn't just physical, it was mental. Jordan began to develop the resilience he'd carry with him through every obstacle he faced, on and off the court. Despite his success in high school, there was still uncertainty about what lay ahead. College coaches saw potential, but there was no guarantee of success. Michael didn't take his foot off the gas. His senior year saw him named North Carolina's Player of the Year, and with it came an invitation to play for the University of North Carolina. But even in college, nothing came easy. As a freshman at UNC, Michael's confidence was tested again. He was placed under the watchful eye of legendary coach Dean Smith, a man known for his meticulous approach to the game. Smith didn't care about Michael's fame or potential. He cared about how hard he worked and whether he was willing to fit into the team structure. Michael, who had thrived on individual accomplishments, was challenged in a way that forced him to grow. He wasn't the star at first, he was one of many talented players working to find his place. But there was no question who the standout was. By the end of his freshman year, Michael had led the Tar Heels to a national championship, hitting the game-winning shot in the final against Georgetown. It was a moment that would define him. It was his first major win on a national stage, and it set the stage for everything that was to come. But even as the crowd roared, Michael knew this was just the beginning. The pressure to perform would only grow from there. As his college career progressed, so did the expectations. Jordan was now widely recognized as one of the best players in the country. His athleticism was extraordinary, his jumper was lethal, and his work ethic was unparalleled. But it wasn't just his physical abilities that made him special, it was his mentality. Michael approached every game as if it was his last. Every time he stepped on the court, he was determined to prove something, that he belonged, that he was capable, and that he was willing to fight for greatness. Yet, even as he continued to shine in college, Michael's future was still uncertain. He had the talent, but the NBA was a different world. Coaches and scouts would test his skills, his mind, and his ability to handle the pressure of being the top pick. But Michael wasn't worried about that. He had faced rejection before, and it only made him stronger. The NBA was simply the next challenge, and it was one that he was ready to face head-on. In 1984, the Chicago Bulls selected Michael Jordan with the third overall pick in the NBA draft, forever changing the course of the league. His arrival in Chicago marked the beginning of something that would redefine the sport of basketball. The city of Chicago hadn't seen anything like him before. There was a palpable buzz in the air whenever Jordan played, and it wasn't just about his scoring. It was his swagger, his confidence, and the way he carried himself. He wasn't just a good player, he was an electric force that demanded attention. But the transition to the NBA wasn't seamless. Michael struggled at first, adjusting to the speed and physicality of the game. His Bulls weren't contenders yet, and the team's losing record only added pressure to his early years in the league. But that never deterred Jordan. If anything, it motivated him even more. He knew that he had to elevate his game in ways that others hadn't. And so, every offseason, he worked tirelessly, honing his skills and pushing himself to the limit. In his second season, Jordan's evolution as a player began to take shape. He led the Bulls to the playoffs, and although they were eliminated early, the message was clear: Michael Jordan wasn't just a future star, he was already one of the best in the game. As his career progressed, the story of his relentless work ethic and competitive drive spread. Teammates came and went, coaches changed, and franchises shifted, but Michael Jordan remained constant. Through the highs and lows of his early years, Michael's commitment to greatness was unwavering. He didn't just want to be the best, he wanted to prove to everyone who doubted him, including those who had cut him from his high school team, that he had earned his place in basketball history. And so, his journey continued, fueled by a relentless hunger for success that would eventually propel him to the pinnacle of the sport. Michael Jordan's early years weren't defined by the championships or accolades he would later collect. They were defined by the struggle, the rejection, and the unrelenting pursuit of greatness that would become his trademark. From the high school gymnasium in Wilmington to the NBA hardwood, Jordan's story was one of overcoming obstacles, proving doubters wrong, and building the foundation for a legacy that would shape the future of the sport. This was just the beginning of Michael Jordan's rise to basketball immortality. Michael Jordan's second season in the NBA was one of transformation. After a solid rookie year, he had proven to the league that he was a star in the making, but the pressure was now on. The Chicago Bulls, under the leadership of coach Kevin Lowery, had yet to reach the upper echelons of the league, and Jordan, while playing at an elite level, was still surrounded by a team that didn't quite match his talent. The individual accolades continued to roll in. He was named to the All-Star team, and his highlight reel seemed to grow with each passing game, but the team was still missing the most crucial element, a winning mentality. The real turning point for Jordan came in the 1986-87 season, when he exploded onto the scene in a way that would leave an indelible mark on the NBA. His scoring average soared to an unprecedented 37.1 points per game, setting a new NBA record for the most points per game in a season at the time. But it wasn't just about the numbers. Jordan was no longer just a player who could score at will, he was a player who could dominate in every aspect of the game. He was taking over games, pushing his teammates to rise to his level, and making plays that had people across the league wondering how anyone could stop him. Even with his individual success, the Chicago Bulls continued to struggle as a team. The team's lack of depth and overall talent were evident as they were eliminated in the first round of the playoffs once again. But rather than being discouraged, Michael took it as a challenge. The loss was not only a bitter pill to swallow, but it was also a clear signal to him that greatness could not be achieved without a team that could support him in his quest for glory. Off the court, Jordan's rise was a cultural phenomenon. His Air Jordan line of sneakers with Nike was already starting to make waves. The brand, which would go on to become one of the most successful endorsements in history, was just beginning to take off. People weren't just buying sneakers, they were buying into Michael Jordan's persona. His relentless work ethic, unmatched competitive nature, and charismatic presence had captured the imagination of a global audience. The Bulls, however, were still in need of more pieces to the puzzle. Enter Jerry Krause, the Bulls' general manager. Krause had been quietly working behind the scenes to bring in the players who would eventually elevate the team to greatness. The first of these key players was a young Scottie Pippen, who was drafted by the Bulls in 1987. Initially, Pippen's role was limited, and his potential hadn't yet been realized. But it didn't take long for Jordan to see what Pippen could bring to the table. The two developed a connection on the court that would become one of the most legendary partnerships in NBA history. Despite the early growing pains, Jordan's influence began to reshape the Bulls. He wasn't just leading by example, he was demanding greatness from his teammates. There was no room for complacency in Jordan's world. If you were on his team, you had to match his intensity and focus. This leadership style was not universally embraced, as it was often seen as grating or abrasive, but Jordan's philosophy was simple: if you wanted to win, you had to push yourself beyond what you thought was possible. The 1988-89 season marked another pivotal year for Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls. Jordan was still the best player in the league, and his statistics only continued to improve. But this time, there was something different in the air. The team was finally beginning to gel. Scottie Pippen had grown into a reliable sidekick, and the team had added key pieces like Brad Sellers and John Paxson. Still, they were missing a true second scorer to alleviate some of the pressure on Jordan. That's when the Bulls made a big move. They acquired point guard B.J. Armstrong and center Bill Cartwright. These moves, though not immediately transformative, began to give the Bulls the balance they had long needed. Jordan's scoring ability and Pippen's all-around game were complemented by the playmaking skills of Armstrong and the veteran presence of Cartwright in the post. The Chicago Bulls were now a legitimate contender. In the 1989 Eastern Conference playoffs, the Bulls finally faced off against the Detroit Pistons, the team that had dominated the East for the previous few years. The Pistons, led by Isaiah Thomas and the Bad Boys, were notorious for their physical, rough style of play, and they had often been a stumbling block for Chicago in past seasons. In the 1988 playoffs, Detroit had knocked the Bulls out with a dominating series. But Jordan wasn't the same player anymore. He had grown. He had refined his game. He was more than just a scorer, he was a leader. And he was determined to break through the wall that was the Pistons. The rivalry between Jordan's Bulls and the Pistons became one of the most intense in NBA history. Detroit was ruthless, employing a strategy known as the Jordan rules, where they would force Jordan to drive to the basket and take physical hits, hoping to wear him down. Jordan, however, refused to back down. Despite the brutal tactics, he continued to attack the basket, scoring at will, and keeping the Bulls in the fight. The 1989 Eastern Conference Finals was a battle of attrition, with the Pistons' defense pushing Jordan to the brink. In Game 5 of the series, it happened. With the Bulls down by 1 point and only a few seconds left in the game, Michael Jordan took the ball at the top of the key, made a quick move to the basket, and elevated over the Pistons' defense to make a jump shot at the buzzer. The crowd erupted as Jordan hit what would become known as the shot, a moment that would forever change the course of his career. It wasn't just a game winner. It was a statement: Michael Jordan was here to stay, and no one could stop him. The Bulls advanced to the NBA Finals for the first time in the Jordan era, and although they lost to the Los Angeles Lakers, the series was a learning experience. The loss was painful, but it showed Jordan what needed to be done. He had the heart, the skill, and the drive. Now, he just needed the right team to help him capture his ultimate goal. As the 1990s approached, Michael Jordan had firmly established himself as the best player in the league. Yet, he was still searching for the one thing that had eluded him, an NBA championship. He knew he couldn't do it alone. He had learned that much from the Pistons, from the rivalry, and from his own moments of struggle. The Chicago Bulls needed to evolve if they were going to take the next step. With Jordan leading the charge, they would eventually find the pieces they needed, but the journey was far from over. Jordan's second season in the NBA was about more than just scoring. It was about realizing that individual greatness was only part of the equation. It was about learning to trust his teammates, to push them to be better, and to build a team that could challenge for championships. It was the season where Michael Jordan, with the help of his teammates and the guidance of coach Phil Jackson, would begin the process of turning the Chicago Bulls into the dominant force they would become in the 1990s. This was the moment when Jordan's journey truly began to align with the greatness he had always believed in. The 1990-1991 season was a turning point in Michael Jordan's career, and in many ways, it marked the moment when he truly began to emerge as the dominant force in the NBA. The pieces of the puzzle were finally falling into place, not just for him, but for the Chicago Bulls as a whole. With the addition of Phil Jackson as head coach, the team began to take on a new identity. Jackson's coaching style, influenced by the principles of Zen Buddhism and the triangle offense, allowed the Bulls to play a more fluid, team-oriented brand of basketball that catered to Jordan's strengths while also empowering his teammates to contribute. Jackson recognized early on that Jordan was not just the team's best player, but its heart and soul. However, he also understood that for the Bulls to win championships, Jordan couldn't do it all by himself. He needed a system that would allow him to excel while also elevating the play of his teammates. The triangle offense, which Jackson had learned under the tutelage of his mentor, Red Halsman, with the New York Knicks, was designed to create spacing, ball movement, and opportunities for every player on the floor. For Jordan, it was a revelation. He was used to carrying the entire load for the Bulls, putting up incredible individual numbers, but never quite getting over the hump in the playoffs. Jackson's system, however, encouraged unselfish play, and Jordan began to trust his teammates in ways he hadn't before. It wasn't easy at first. Jordan had been the focal point of the offense for so long, but over time, he realized that the triangle offense could make him even more dangerous. It spread the floor, creating opportunities for him to exploit mismatches and score, while also giving him the chance to set up teammates for easy baskets. Scottie Pippen, who had grown into one of the league's top players, was now emerging as Jordan's perfect counterpart. Pippen's versatility, defensive prowess, and ability to handle the ball made him a natural fit in Jackson's system. The two formed one of the most potent duos in NBA history. While Jordan was the focal point of the offense, Pippen took on a larger role, especially on defense, where he could lock down opposing players, disrupt passing lanes, and even initiate fast breaks. The team's chemistry began to improve, and the results on the court were immediate. The Bulls stormed through the regular season, finishing with a league-best 61-21 record, an 11-game improvement from the previous year. Jordan's scoring remained at an elite level, but his playmaking also improved. He averaged 6.0 assists per game, a career high, as he learned to trust his teammates more. It wasn't just about scoring anymore. Jordan was becoming a more complete player. In the playoffs, the Bulls faced some familiar challenges. The Detroit Pistons, who had been the Bulls' nemesis in the past, stood in their way once again. The Bad Boys were still tough and physical, but Jordan and the Bulls were no longer intimidated. Jordan had learned how to break through their defense, using his agility and basketball IQ to navigate around the Pistons' rugged approach. The Bulls dispatched the Pistons in a convincing 4-0 sweep in the Eastern Conference Finals, avenging years of frustration. For Jordan, it was more than just a series win, it was a statement. He had conquered his biggest hurdle, and the way he did it made it clear that he was ready to take the next step. The media, fans, and analysts began to recognize that this was a different Michael Jordan, one who was playing with a sense of purpose beyond individual glory. He had learned how to win with a team, and it was clear that the Chicago Bulls were now legitimate contenders for the NBA title. In the NBA Finals, the Bulls squared off against the Los Angeles Lakers, a team that had ruled the NBA throughout the 1980s. The Lakers were led by Magic Johnson, a player who had long been considered the greatest point guard of all time, and they had a mix of veteran players and young stars. But the Bulls were a different kind of team. They were hungry, talented, and led by a player who was no longer just trying to prove his individual greatness. Jordan was focused on winning a championship, and he knew that his time had come. The final series was intense, with the Lakers looking to defend their championship and show that their era was far from over. But from the moment the series began, it was clear that the Bulls had the upper hand. Jordan's play was transcendent. In Game 2, he put on a performance that would become one of the defining moments of his career, 13 points in a dazzling 3-minute stretch. His play was a mixture of precision, athleticism, and leadership as he carried the Bulls on his back, dominating on both ends of the floor. But the finals were more than just about Jordan. The supporting cast was playing its part, especially Scottie Pippen, who guarded Magic Johnson and kept him in check throughout the series. Pippen's defense on Johnson was a key factor in the Bulls' success, as he was able to neutralize the Lakers' leader and allow Jordan to focus on his scoring. The team played with poise, and it became evident that they were no longer just a group of players who relied on Jordan to do everything. The Bulls had grown into a complete team, with everyone contributing to the cause. Game 5 of the finals was the culmination of all the hard work, the growth, and the sacrifices that had led up to this moment. With the Bulls leading the series 3-1, they had the opportunity to clinch their first ever NBA title. In front of a raucous home crowd at the Chicago Stadium, Michael Jordan and the Bulls delivered. The Lakers put up a valiant fight, but it was clear that the Bulls were the better team. With a dominant 108-101 victory, Chicago won their first championship, and Michael Jordan's legacy as one of the greatest players in NBA history was cemented. Jordan was named Finals MVP, having averaged 31.2 points per game, 6.6 rebounds, and 11 assists during the series. But it wasn't just about the numbers. It was about the journey, the challenges, the growth, and the lessons learned along the way. Jordan had finally reached the summit of the NBA, but this championship was just the beginning. He had proven that he could lead a team to victory, and with the Bulls now the reigning champions, there was no telling how far they could go. As the confetti rained down in Chicago Stadium, Jordan held the championship trophy high, knowing that this moment marked the realization of everything he had worked for. It wasn't just about the titles or the accolades, it was about the sense of accomplishment that came from doing it with a team, from pushing himself and his teammates to greatness. The championship was a validation of his dedication and the team's collective effort, and it set the stage for a dynasty that would go on to define an era of basketball. The 1991 season marked the start of a new chapter in Michael Jordan's career. He was no longer just a player trying to prove his greatness, he was now a champion, a leader, and a player who had conquered every obstacle in his path. But this victory wasn't the end of the story, it was only the beginning of what would become one of the most dominant runs in NBA history. Jordan's hunger for more was unrelenting, and the Chicago Bulls, led by their fearless leader, would continue to build on their success in the years to come. The 1991-1992 season marked the beginning of the Chicago Bulls dynasty, and for Michael Jordan, it was about solidifying his place among the NBA's elite. After winning his first championship, Jordan was no longer just a great player, he was now a champion, with the validation that came from leading a team to the highest peak. But that only fueled his hunger for more. Jordan wasn't satisfied with just one title, he wanted to prove that his first was not a fluke, and that the Bulls were a force to be reckoned with for years to come. The challenge now wasn't just about repeating success, but about maintaining the same intensity and drive that had gotten them to the top. The 1992 season had high expectations, but Michael, ever the perfectionist, saw it as another test. His commitment to excellence, however, was contagious. The team's chemistry was stronger than ever, and while Jordan was still the clear leader, the Bulls had become more than just a one-man show. Scottie Pippen had grown into a legitimate star, and the team had added key veterans like Horace Grant and John Paxson, who brought invaluable experience and leadership to the table. The 1992 Bulls were a well-oiled machine, and the players knew that their success would come not just from individual brilliance, but from playing as a cohesive unit. The triangle offense that Phil Jackson had instilled in them the year before was now ingrained in their style of play. It was no longer just a system, it was their identity. Jordan, ever the student of the game, had fully embraced the offense, and it allowed him to showcase his versatility. He wasn't just scoring, he was creating opportunities for his teammates, and his leadership was now fully developed. He no longer had to do it all on his own. As the regular season progressed, the Bulls faced challenges, but they seemed to be playing at a different level than the rest of the league. Jordan was his usual self, putting up outstanding numbers, but what made this season different was his ability to elevate those around him. Pippen was consistently outstanding, playing elite defense and showing his all-around skills on offense. The Bulls were simply dominant, finishing with a 67-15 record, the best in the league. But while the regular season was a testament to their strength, the playoffs were the true test. The Bulls had to go through the gauntlet again to prove they could repeat as champions, and it wasn't going to be easy. In the first round, they dispatched the Miami Heat with little trouble, But the real challenge came in the Eastern Conference Finals, where they faced off against the New York Knicks. The Knicks were a tough, physical team, and their defense was designed to make life difficult for Jordan. But the Bulls were different this time. They were no longer reliant on Jordan to score 50 points a night. They had Pippen, and they had the triangle offense. It was a team effort, and despite the Knicks' physical play, the Bulls were simply too talented and too deep. They swept the Knicks 4-0 and made their way to the NBA Finals. The Finals, however, were a different beast. The Bulls were now facing the Portland Trail Blazers, led by Clyde Drexler, one of the best shooting guards in the game. The media had built this matchup into a battle between Jordan and Drexler, two players who played similar positions and had similar styles. Jordan, however, wasn't just interested in winning the battle of the two shooting guards. He wanted to prove something bigger, that he was the best player in the world, and that the Bulls were the team to beat. The stage was set for an unforgettable finals series. Game 1 was a statement. The Bulls came out firing, with Jordan leading the charge. He dropped 35 points in the first half alone, showing no mercy to the Blazers. His performance was electrifying, and it set the tone for the series. But it wasn't just his scoring that made the difference, it was the way he controlled the game. He was in complete command, dictating the pace and making everyone around him better. The Bulls won the game in convincing fashion, and Jordan's dominance was on full display. Game 2 was more of the same. Jordan continued his brilliance, but it was his shooting display that captured the world's attention. In one of the most iconic moments of his career, Jordan hit 6 three-pointers in the first half, a feat that was almost unheard of for someone who was primarily known for his driving and mid-range game. It was a moment that would become legendary, a sign that Jordan was not just playing at a high level, he was playing a different game entirely. The Blazers were left stunned, and the Bulls took a 2-0 series lead. As the series shifted to Portland, the Blazers showed signs of life. They fought back hard in Game 3, with Drexler leading the charge, but Jordan was simply unstoppable. The Bulls won the game and took a 3-0 lead in the series, effectively putting the Blazers on the brink of elimination. Jordan's performance throughout the series was nothing short of spectacular, and his ability to carry his team on his shoulders while making everyone else around him better was evident. Game 4, with the Bulls leading 3-0, was a chance to finish the series off in style. In the final game of the series, the Bulls completed the sweep, clinching their second consecutive NBA championship. Jordan was named Finals MVP for the second straight year, and the celebration in Chicago was a moment of pure joy. But it wasn't just the championship that mattered to Jordan, it was the way he had proven his point. He had dominated every single aspect of the finals, from scoring to playmaking to leadership. He had shown the world that not only was he the best player in the game, but that the Bulls were a dynasty in the making. But as much as Jordan was enjoying the fruits of his labor, he knew that the challenge wasn't over. Winning 2 championships was impressive, but the true test of greatness would come in sustaining success over the long haul. Jordan wasn't the type of player to rest on his laurels. He had already set his sights on the next goal. As he looked to the future, he knew that he and the Bulls were on the cusp of something historic, something that would change the landscape of the NBA for years to come. For Michael Jordan, the 1992 season wasn't just about adding another championship to his resume, it was about cementing his legacy as one of the greatest players to ever play the game. He had already proven that he could lead a team to the top, but now he was proving that he could do it again, and again, and again. The Bulls had become a dynasty, and Jordan was at the center of it all. But the road ahead was still filled with challenges. As the team prepared for the next season, Jordan's focus was unwavering. He knew that to remain the best, he had to keep improving, keep pushing, and keep demanding greatness from himself and his teammates. The 1992 championship was just the beginning. Jordan had reached the pinnacle of the NBA, but the hunger for more success was insatiable. He had achieved greatness, but he was far from satisfied. He wanted to build something that would endure for years, something that would make people look back and remember the Chicago Bulls as the greatest team to ever play the game. And with Michael Jordan at the helm, that dream was within reach. The 1992 to 1993 NBA season was poised to be another step forward in Michael Jordan's quest for dominance. The Chicago Bulls were the defending champions, coming off a successful 1992 campaign that saw them solidify their place as one of the greatest teams in NBA history. Jordan had delivered back-to-back championships, and the pressure was mounting. Everyone knew that the Bulls were hungry for a third consecutive title, but Jordan had set his sights higher. For him, the goal was not just to win another championship, it was to continue proving that his greatness wasn't a fluke. From the very start of the 1992 to 1993 season, it was clear that the Bulls were primed to continue their dominance. Jordan was in peak form, and his level of play had reached new heights. He was now a more complete player than ever before, using the triangle offense to maximize his skill set while still carrying the burden of being the team's most dominant offensive force. His confidence was unmatched, and his work ethic had rubbed off on his teammates. The Bulls were a cohesive unit, not just reliant on Jordan to perform at an MVP level, but a team that had fully embraced the idea of collective success. This season, however, would present challenges that would test Jordan and the Bulls in ways they hadn't been pushed before. The league was stronger than ever, and teams like the New York Knicks and the Philadelphia 76ers were emerging as serious threats. The Eastern Conference was no longer a guaranteed path to the finals for the Bulls, and the competition in the West was just as formidable. But Jordan, as always, was up for the challenge. One of the most significant changes for the Bulls that season was the continued growth of Scottie Pippen. While Jordan had always been the team's best player, Pippen was no longer just a supporting star. He was now a bona fide all-star, capable of taking over games himself. His all-around game, especially his defense, rebounding, and playmaking, had become essential to the Bulls' success. The duo of Jordan and Pippen, which had already been deadly, was now even more formidable. The addition of other solid contributors like Horace Grant, John Paxson, and B.J. Armstrong gave the Bulls the depth they needed to truly compete at the highest level. Throughout the regular season, the Bulls proved to be just as dominant as the year before. They finished with a 57-25 record, the second best in the NBA, behind the Phoenix Suns. Jordan led the league in scoring once again, averaging 32.6 points per game, a testament to his unrivaled ability to take over games when it mattered most. He was the focal point of every opposing team's game plan, yet still found ways to dominate. But this season, Jordan's scoring was just part of the equation. He also contributed 6.7 rebounds and 5.5 assists per game, showcasing his growth as a more complete player. His leadership was more apparent than ever, as he found ways to get the best out of his teammates while still maintaining his own extraordinary level of play. Despite their dominance in the regular season, the playoffs were once again where the Bulls would face their true test. The road to a third consecutive championship wouldn't be easy, and the Eastern Conference playoffs would be the first major hurdle. The Bulls' first-round matchup was against the Atlanta Hawks, a team with one of the league's best scorers in Dominique Wilkins. While the Hawks were a dangerous team, they simply didn't have the firepower to compete with the Bulls. The series was over quickly, with the Bulls sweeping the Hawks 3-0. In the conference semifinals, the Bulls faced a much tougher opponent, the New York Knicks. The Knicks were a physical team, known for their brutal defense and hard-nosed play. Led by Patrick Ewing, the Knicks were poised to challenge the Bulls for supremacy in the East. This series was a grueling test for Chicago, as the Knicks pushed them to the limit. The Bulls' offense was slowed by New York's tough defense, and the series became a war of attrition. But despite the Knicks' best efforts, the Bulls were too much for them. Jordan continued to lead the charge, but it was Pippen's defensive presence and all-around play that helped propel the Bulls to victory. The series went to a tough Game 7, but the Bulls ultimately prevailed, defeating the Knicks 4-3. With the Knicks behind them, the Bulls now turned their attention to the Eastern Conference Finals. Their opponent was the Cleveland Cavaliers, a team that had always been a thorn in Chicago's side. Led by Brad Daugherty, Mark Price, and the talented young guard, Craig Ello, the Cavaliers were a talented but underrated team. The series was expected to be another tough test, but the Bulls were ready. Game 5 of the Eastern Conference Finals would become one of the most iconic moments in NBA history. With the series tied at 2-2, the Bulls faced elimination in Cleveland. The game was tight, and with just seconds left, the Cavaliers had a 1-point lead. Jordan, as usual, took control in the clutch. With 3 seconds left on the clock, he caught the ball on the wing, dribbled past the defense, and launched a shot over Elo at the buzzer. The ball sailed through the air, and as time expired, it swished through the net. Jordan had done it again. He had hit another game winner, one of the most iconic shots of his career, and sent the Bulls to the finals. The moment became known as the shot, and it would remain one of the most memorable plays in NBA history. The Bulls now had their sights set on a third consecutive championship. Their opponents in the 1993 NBA Finals were the Phoenix Suns, led by MVP Charles Barkley. Barkley had been a dominant force throughout the season, and the Suns were a well-rounded team with talent all over the floor. It was clear that the Suns would be a formidable opponent, and many believed they could take down the Bulls. Game 1 of the finals was an immediate statement from Chicago. The Bulls won a hard-fought contest, with Jordan putting up 31 points and Pippen adding 22. The Suns were game, but they couldn't stop Jordan's relentless assault on the basket. The series continued in similar fashion, with Jordan's brilliance and Pippen's defense leading the charge. The Suns were tough, but they couldn't match the intensity of the Bulls. As the series wore on, Jordan's dominance continued to shine through. In Game 4, Jordan scored 55 points, putting on one of the most dominant performances of his career. The Suns fought back, but they could not contain the Bulls' star. The series eventually went to Game 6, with the Bulls up 3-2 and looking to seal the deal. The Suns fought valiantly, but it was Jordan's clutch play in the final moments of Game 6 that sealed the victory. With the Bulls up by 4 points in the final minute, Jordan's defense and rebounding helped Chicago secure the win. The Chicago Bulls had done it. They had won their third consecutive NBA title, cementing their place in history as one of the greatest dynasties of all time. Jordan was named Finals MVP once again, having led the Bulls with 41.0 points per game. But as he held the trophy, it was clear that this championship meant something more. It wasn't just about winning, it was about proving that he and the Bulls had reached the pinnacle of basketball greatness. For Michael Jordan, the 1993 championship was the culmination of years of hard work, sacrifice, and determination. But it also marked the beginning of an unexpected and surprising chapter in his life. As he hoisted his third consecutive title, little did anyone know that Jordan was about to step away from the game that had defined his life. The third title was not the end of the story, it was simply another beginning. In the summer of 1993, Michael Jordan shocked the world by announcing his retirement from basketball. At the peak of his powers, having just completed one of the most remarkable seasons in NBA history, Jordan stepped away from the game, leaving many to wonder why. He had won 3 consecutive championships with the Chicago Bulls, been named Finals MVP each time, and had solidified his place as the greatest basketball player of his generation. For fans and analysts alike, his decision was almost incomprehensible. The reasoning behind Jordan's departure wasn't simple. It wasn't about a lack of love for the game or an unwillingness to compete. It was deeply personal. The death of his father, James Jordan Sr., earlier that summer had shaken Michael to his core. His father, who had been his biggest supporter and his source of motivation throughout his life, had been tragically murdered during a robbery while driving home in North Carolina. The pain from his loss was something Michael couldn't escape, and in the wake of such a devastating blow, basketball seemed far less important than family and personal healing. Jordan's decision to retire was also influenced by his own sense of fulfillment. He had achieved everything he had set out to accomplish in the NBA, having conquered the sport and reached the pinnacle of greatness. 3 championships, back-to-back-to-back, had given him a level of satisfaction that few athletes ever experience. Yet, even with all the success, the pressure and the constant expectation to win weighed heavily on him. He had reached a point where he felt he needed a break, a chance to step away from the limelight and reflect on his life. But his retirement wasn't just a response to grief or burnout, it was a recalibration of his purpose. Jordan was known for his intense drive, but that drive had always been fueled by the love of competition and his desire to be the best. Without basketball, he was searching for something else to channel his passion into. It wasn't long before Jordan found that outlet, baseball. His father had always dreamed of him playing professional baseball, and Michael decided to honor that legacy by stepping onto the diamond. In March of 1994, Jordan signed a minor league contract with the Chicago White Sox, marking the beginning of his baseball career. He was assigned to play for the Birmingham Barons, a Double-A affiliate of the White Sox. While his skills as a baseball player were nowhere near as refined as his basketball abilities, Jordan's determination to succeed was evident. He faced ridicule from some quarters, with critics questioning why he would leave the NBA at the height of his career to pursue a sport in which he had little experience. But Jordan's competitive nature didn't allow him to be dissuaded by the doubters. He worked tirelessly on his baseball game, improving his batting average and adapting to the new sport. However, after a season spent playing baseball, Jordan realized that his passion for the sport wasn't as strong as it had been for basketball. His time in baseball wasn't a failure, but it wasn't the career he had envisioned for himself. He felt a deep sense of longing for basketball, a realization that his true love was the game he had left behind. Michael Jordan wasn't just a great basketball player, he was basketball. It was in his blood. As the 1995 season began, rumors swirled that Jordan was planning a return to the NBA. At first, it seemed like an impossible idea. After all, Jordan had been away for nearly 2 years. He was out of shape, and the Bulls had gone on to win the 1994 playoffs without him. However, in March 1995, Jordan shocked the world once again when he issued a simple, yet powerful, statement, "I'm back." Those 2 words sent shockwaves through the sports world. When Jordan returned to the NBA, it was clear that the fire was still burning inside him. His body was out of shape, and it took him some time to regain his rhythm. He wasn't the same player he had been before he left, but his natural talent and basketball IQ never went away. Slowly but surely, he found his way back to the top, leading the Bulls through a second resurgence that would culminate in yet another championship. The Bulls were not the same team they had been when Jordan left. Phil Jackson had remained as head coach, and the team still had its key players, including Scottie Pippen, but there were changes. The Bulls had gone through a period of uncertainty without their leader, and it took time to find the same level of cohesion that they had enjoyed in their championship years. But with Jordan back in the fold, the Bulls quickly regained their place at the top of the Eastern Conference. The 1995 to 1996 season would be Jordan's first full year back in the league, and he wasted no time in showing that he was still the best player in the world. He averaged 30.4 points per game, and though he was not yet in his absolute peak form, he was more than capable of taking over games. More importantly, he was playing with a sense of purpose that had been missing before. The team around him was solid, and the Bulls' leadership was solidified. Scottie Pippen was at his best, and other players like Tony Kukoc and Steve Kerr played critical roles as well. The Chicago Bulls dominated the regular season, finishing with a 72-10 record, the best in NBA history at the time. Jordan had returned with a vengeance, and the team was firing on all cylinders. They steamrolled through the playoffs, defeating the Miami Heat, the New York Knicks, and the Orlando Magic, who had beaten them in the 1995 playoffs, to reach the NBA Finals once again. In the finals, the Bulls faced off against the Seattle Supersonics, a team led by Gary Payton, Shawn Kemp, and a solid supporting cast. While the Sonics were a strong team, they couldn't match up to the Bulls, who were firing on all cylinders. Chicago won the series 4-2, and Jordan was named Finals MVP for the 4th time in his career. His return to the NBA was nothing short of triumphant, and it was clear that, even after his brief retirement, Jordan was still the best player in the world. Jordan's decision to return to the NBA was a powerful reminder of his unyielding competitive spirit. While his time away had been a period of self-reflection and personal growth, it was also clear that he was driven by a need to compete, to prove that his greatness was not dependent on external validation. His return was a moment of rebirth, not just for Jordan, but for the entire Chicago Bulls franchise. The 1995 to 1996 season marked the beginning of another era of dominance for the Bulls, and Michael Jordan would go on to win 3 more championships, securing his place as the greatest basketball player of all time. His return proved that, while he had left the game for a time, he had never truly been gone. His impact on the NBA, on the Bulls, and on the game of basketball itself would continue to resonate for years to come. Michael Jordan had returned, and once again, he was on top of the world. In 1996, Michael Jordan's return to the NBA felt like the beginning of a new chapter, yet it was a continuation of an ongoing legacy. The Chicago Bulls were a force once again, and Jordan was at the center of it all. Despite the time he had spent away from basketball, his return was seamless. He didn't just rejoin the team, he took over. His return wasn't just about reclaiming the throne he had left, it was about solidifying the dynasty that the Bulls had started, and about rewriting the narrative of what greatness meant in the NBA. That 1995 to 1996 season was an unforgettable one. The Bulls, led by Jordan and a supporting cast that included Scottie Pippen, Tony Kukoc, and Steve Kerr, were on a mission. The chemistry within the team was undeniable. This was no longer just a team with a superstar, it was a team built on unity, a clear vision, and a relentless work ethic. Every player, from the bench to the starting five, understood their role, and that was part of what made the Bulls so formidable. Jordan's return coincided with the Bulls' desire to prove themselves as the dominant team of the 1990s. The pressure was on. Despite winning 3 titles before his retirement, many wondered whether the Bulls could recapture the magic they had enjoyed. They faced doubts. Could Jordan return to his former self after his time away from the game? Would the team be able to gel with him back in the mix? The Bulls answered those questions emphatically. Chicago finished the 1995 to 1996 regular season with a staggering 72-10 record, the best in NBA history at that time. Jordan's individual numbers were as impressive as ever, 30.4 points per game, 6.6 rebounds, and 4.3 assists per game, yet it wasn't just the stats that made this season special. Jordan was not only a scoring machine, he was a leader in every sense of the word. His presence on the court lifted the entire team, making them a more cohesive and dominant unit. But as dominant as the regular season was, the true test would come in the playoffs. The Chicago Bulls were expected to win, but expectations come with pressure. The question wasn't whether Jordan would perform, it was whether he could continue to elevate the team around him to a level they hadn't reached before. His leadership was tested time and again as the Bulls stormed through the postseason. In the first round of the playoffs, the Bulls faced the Miami Heat. The Heat were a solid team, but they were no match for the firepower of the Bulls. Jordan led the charge, and the series was over in 3 games. The Bulls showed their dominance, and the road to the finals was officially underway. Next came the New York Knicks, who had been one of the toughest defensive teams in the league. The Knicks had given the Bulls trouble in previous seasons, and this series had the potential to be a grueling battle. But Jordan wasn't having it. His ability to elevate his game in clutch moments was unmatched. Even when the Knicks played their best defense, Jordan was able to find ways to score, control the game, and bring his team along with him. The Bulls made quick work of the Knicks, taking the series 4-1 and advancing to the Eastern Conference Finals. The challenge in the Eastern Conference Finals came from the Orlando Magic, led by Shaquille O'Neal and Penny Hardaway. The Magic had the potential to be a dangerous team, but they were facing the full force of a championship-driven Bulls squad. Despite Orlando's impressive lineup, they couldn't keep up with the Bulls' intensity. Chicago took the series in a 4-0 sweep, and Jordan continued to assert himself as the undisputed leader of the team. His performances were consistently brilliant, but the teamwork that surrounded him made the Bulls nearly impossible to beat. By the time the Bulls reached the 1996 NBA Finals, they were a well-oiled machine. They had steamrolled their way through the competition, and the finals were expected to be just another step toward greatness. Their opponents were the Seattle Supersonics, led by Gary Payton and Shawn Kemp. The Supersonics were a tough team, and they were ready to challenge the Bulls, but they couldn't have been more outmatched. Jordan was at the peak of his powers, and despite the Supersonics' best efforts to slow him down, he was too much to handle. The finals began with a bang. Jordan came out with a ferocity that made it clear he wasn't just playing for another title, he was playing for something more. He dominated the opening game, and though Seattle managed to put up a fight, they could not match the intensity of the Bulls. Chicago won Game 1, and Jordan's performance set the tone for the rest of the series. Game 2 was a continuation of the same theme. Jordan's impact was undeniable, but he was far from a one-man show. Scottie Pippen was playing at an elite level, Tony Kukoc provided critical scoring off the bench, and Steve Kerr made key contributions in clutch moments. The Bulls were firing on all cylinders. The Supersonics had no answer for the Bulls' collective talent, and Chicago took a commanding 2-0 lead. As the series shifted to Seattle, the Supersonics came out strong in Game 3, trying to defend their home court. But Jordan, with his laser-like focus, wouldn't let the Bulls slip. Even when Seattle's defense had its best moments, Jordan found ways to put the ball in the basket. He didn't just rely on scoring, he made critical assists, rebounded, and defended at a high level. The Bulls took Game 3, and Jordan's leadership was once again on full display. By Game 4, the Bulls were on the verge of winning their 4th title in 6 years. Seattle, facing elimination, put up a fight, but it was clear the Bulls were destined for another championship. Jordan had set the standard, and the rest of the team followed. In the final minutes of Game 4, the Bulls secured their victory, winning 87-75. With the series 4-2 in favor of Chicago, Jordan had done it again. He had led the Bulls to yet another championship. It was the perfect culmination of a season in which Jordan had once again proven that no one could match his level of dominance. Jordan was named Finals MVP for the 4th time, further cementing his place in NBA history. He had now won 4 championships with the Bulls and had achieved everything he had set out to do. His return to the NBA had not only been successful, it had been historic. The 1995-1996 Chicago Bulls, with Jordan at the helm, were arguably the greatest team in NBA history. The combination of individual brilliance, leadership, and unselfish team play was unmatched. But even as Jordan celebrated his 4th championship, there was an understanding that the road to greatness was far from over. The NBA had become a tougher league, with rising competition and new challenges on the horizon. But Jordan had proven that, even after 2 years away from the game, he could return and lead his team to the top. His hunger for success had never been greater, and as the Bulls prepared for the next season, it was clear that their dynasty was far from over. Michael Jordan wasn't just a player, he was the driving force behind a team that would continue to dominate the NBA for years to come. By the end of the 1997-1998 season, Michael Jordan's name had already been etched into the annals of NBA history. He had done it all. He had built a legacy that transcended the sport, having won 6 NBA championships, 5 MVP awards, and earned countless accolades that cemented his place as the greatest basketball player of all time. But as the 1997-1998 season progressed, Jordan was fully aware that his time with the Chicago Bulls was drawing to a close. The team, having won 5 championships in 7 years, had reached the peak of its success, and the tension surrounding the Bulls' future was palpable. The once dominant dynasty, now aging, was on the verge of disbanding. The 1997-1998 season had begun with uncertainty. There were rumors that head coach Phil Jackson would not return, that Scottie Pippen was unhappy with his contract, and that key players on the team might soon be leaving. Despite the whispers and the looming changes, Jordan remained laser-focused on one thing: winning another title. The notion of going out on top, leaving the game on his terms with another championship, was the only goal that mattered. Michael Jordan had already proven his resilience time and again. Whether it was his battle against the Detroit Pistons in the late 1980s or the comeback after his first retirement in 1995, he had consistently met every challenge with fierce determination. Yet, as the 1997-1998 season wore on, the weight of the potential end of an era began to affect the team. The players were not just playing for a championship, they were playing for a final, shared goal. It became clear that this was Jordan's last ride with the Bulls, and his focus was singular: to give everything he had left and end on the highest possible note. Jordan's leadership remained as powerful as ever. He had the ability to push his teammates to greatness, even when they struggled or were dealing with personal issues. Scottie Pippen, despite his ongoing contract frustrations, was at the peak of his skills. The two formed one of the greatest duos in NBA history, with Pippen's all-around play complementing Jordan's unmatched scoring ability. The pair, though facing pressure from all directions, remained a formidable force on the court. Players like Steve Kerr, Ron Harper, and Tony Kukoc provided invaluable depth, and the team as a whole was still playing at a level of excellence that most teams couldn't even dream of. The team's success on the court reflected their collective determination. Chicago finished the regular season with a 62-20 record, the best in the league, and with Jordan playing at a high level, averaging 28.7 points per game, 5.8 rebounds, and 3.5 assists, he seemed ageless. Yet, despite his stellar performances, there were moments when it seemed like the weight of his career was starting to take its toll. Jordan was 35 years old, and while he had defied age for years, there were signs of wear. The road to the finals was never easy, and every victory felt like it was a step closer to the final chapter of his extraordinary career. The 1998 playoffs saw the Bulls face their toughest challenges yet, not just from their opponents but from the emotional weight of the season. In the first round, the Bulls took on the New Jersey Nets. The Nets, led by the explosive Jason Kidd, were a formidable challenge, but they didn't have the experience or the depth to match up with the Bulls' championship pedigree. Chicago dispatched them in 4 games, but the toll of the season was beginning to show. The competition would only get fiercer from here. In the Eastern Conference Finals, the Bulls met the Indiana Pacers, a team brimming with talent. Led by Reggie Miller, the Pacers were tough, physical, and mentally strong. The series was a battle, pushing the Bulls to the brink. Every game was a test of endurance and willpower. But Jordan, as always, was up to the challenge. Game 7 of the series saw the Bulls advance, and although they weren't playing at the level they had reached in years past, Jordan's leadership and ability to rise to the occasion carried the team. The Bulls triumphed 88-83, sending them to the NBA Finals once again. In the finals, the Bulls faced the Utah Jazz, led by the formidable duo of Karl Malone and John Stockton. The Jazz had been one of the top teams in the Western Conference for years, but they had never been able to break through and win a championship. The Bulls, with their experience and determination, were on a mission to ensure that the Jazz wouldn't be the team to spoil the end of the Bulls dynasty. The finals were a hard-fought series, with every game filled with tension. Utah was relentless, and despite their experience, the Bulls were fighting against the clock. Jordan was still the best player on the floor, but his body wasn't the same as it had been in his younger years. Every shot, every drive, every moment was precious. But even as the Jazz pushed the Bulls to their limits, Michael Jordan found a way to do what he had always done best, deliver when it mattered most. In Game 6 of the series, with the Bulls leading 3-2, it all came down to one final game. The game was tied in the final moments, and with 18 seconds left, the ball found its way to Jordan. In typical fashion, he took control of the situation. He dribbled to the top of the key, sizing up his defender, and as the clock ticked down, he pulled up for a jump shot. The shot sailed through the air with perfect form. The ball swished through the net as the buzzer sounded. The Bulls had won their 6th championship, and Michael Jordan had delivered his final shot as a member of the Chicago Bulls. Jordan was named Finals MVP for the 6th time, cementing his place in NBA history as the greatest player to ever play the game. The Chicago Bulls had achieved the impossible, 6 championships in 8 years. The dynasty was complete. Jordan's career had come full circle, and his legacy was untouchable. As he held the championship trophy in his hands, it was clear that he had nothing left to prove. He had won at every level, conquered every obstacle, and built a legacy that would last forever. The 1997-1998 season marked the end of an era, not just for Michael Jordan, but for the entire NBA. Jordan's impact on the game was immeasurable. He had brought the NBA to new heights, making it a global phenomenon. He had changed the way the game was played, the way athletes approached their careers, and the way fans engaged with the sport. Jordan was more than just a basketball player. He was a cultural icon, a symbol of excellence, and a model of perseverance. When he finally walked away from the game for the second time, it wasn't with regret or a sense of unfinished business. It was with the satisfaction of knowing he had done everything he set out to do. His legacy would live on forever, not just in the records he set, but in the countless players he inspired and the millions of fans who had witnessed his greatness. Michael Jordan's story was one of ambition, hard work, and relentless pursuit of greatness. He had achieved the impossible and left an indelible mark on the NBA. But more than anything, his story was about passion, the passion to be the best, to overcome every challenge, and to never stop reaching for the top. Jordan's impact on the game will never be forgotten, and his legacy will continue to inspire generations to come. As the lights dimmed on his playing career, Michael Jordan had truly become a legend, forever enshrined in the history of basketball.